I showed up to Skullcandy, and I was 72 hours in when I knew I'd made the worst mistake of my life.
Welcome back to Case Studies. I am with someone who's become a dear friend. The way I would kick this off or do an introduction to Jeremy Andrus is you have so many qualities that I like truly admire, and I'll list them off. So, I love kind of your optimism. Like you have a way to see the world that is kind of glass half full, but also being real with kind of like the task at hand. And just as an outside observer and watching your career, I think that there's so much magic in optimism. I think, the pessimists get more credit or sound smarter.
Absolutely.
Because everybody can say it's not going to work, but kind of that can-do mentality. I love the way you support Kristen. We both of us have strong women as spouses. And
Indeed.
I love how you just get behind her and you're just her biggest cheerleader. And I try to do that. I try to, like, when I think about how I want to show up as a husband, I want to be like Chelsea's biggest champion.
Totally.
Always. There's no one cheering louder. I love the way you get back to the community. You guys just have like the biggest hearts and give in a big way and give till it hurts. And I love the way you bring people together. And like even, Traeger this last year, I kind of finally got on the Traeger bandwagon, and Traeger is such a magic company. Traeger is some companies don't have soul. Traeger has soul. Like Traeger has this soul to it that just, there's something about barbecue and gathering and bringing people together that it's just really like, it's important to me. And I'm like one customer of a lot of customers. So I'm so excited to chat with you, brother.
This is great. I'm happy to be here. Casey, I will tell you, first of all, those are super nice things. And there's so much to unpack because those are the nice things that I've been blessed. Chris and I have been super blessed. And, there's a bumpy journey that comes along with all of those things.
Of course.
And then there's also this list of things that I know about myself and that Kristen and I know about each other that we're working on. So it's like the journey never ends. Casey Baugh is a name that I'd heard for many years, and I don't know why it took us so long to get connected. And, what people say about you and your family and your heart and your career journey, turns out it was all true. And it's interesting when you've got so many friends in common for so long.
You never connect.
And then it's like fast friends because it was true.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about this conversation. Boy, it's I try not to do very many podcasts, in part because sometimes I think they showcase too much of the positive and not enough of the journey. But having watched a number of yours, including your conversation with Kristen, which I thought was incredible, I'm excited to be here.
No, I'm excited, and I have some insights to your journey that I think somebody from the outside, what you're describing is like, the end that everybody sees or the outward appearance, and then kind of how you like what's behind the curtain. And me and you have talked about dark times, like a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I actually want to go there because they're like such fun stories to me. So like one thing that me and you share is both of us are investment addicts, junkies.
It's my passion.
Like
I
junkies.
love it.
Yeah. Like, and I didn't know this about you until I was talking to you about the first time you really won and also really lost.
Yeah.
And I think this is like an all-time story. So I want to go there like to start. So like, Maybe let's go back to the beginning. So home was East Coast.
You know what? I've kind of lived all over the world. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest in a lower middle income family. Lived in a small town in Minnesota in an old farmhouse that my parents bought for $50,000.
I didn't know that.
Which felt like a lot to them then.
Yeah.
And in some interesting experiences that really opened my eyes to the world. The first was going from a small town in Minnesota to England when I was 11 years old, and having a really hard experience leaving my dog behind, which was like, I loved this dog and we couldn't take her with us for quarantine reasons, and showing up a very unhappy kid, popular in Minnesota, not popular in England, an American accent, not in London, but in the Midlands of England, going back to Boston with this prepubescent British accent, that Boston's not the friendliest place in the world.
So break it down a little bit, though.
Yeah.
Was it a mission? Like, what was it that took your family to...
It's my dad's career.
Okay.
It was his career, and we moved around a fair bit. And it's interesting. Kristen grew up and moved one street over her entire life.
Wow.
And so we've had an opportunity to compare our experiences of sort of moving around. Like I've had different experiences, and honestly, they were mostly hard. I mean, like, I have a great family. I love my family, but the experience of being an introverted kid and moving to very different places, always, I was always young for my grade. I was always small. I mean, I was 5'5", 105 pounds when I got my driver's license.
What?
Which
you were little.
I was a little kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I took my driver's test in a Suburban, and that was like, that presented some issues in and of itself. But you know what? But I was always confident. I've always had an inner confidence and a drive. And I look at my upbringing then, and I say, being, I just grew up with a chip on my shoulder, and it wasn't a negative chip. It's like, I'm smaller. I'm not as talented. I am introverted. If I don't double down on what I believe in myself, I'm going to get left behind. And it's interesting, as I overcome some of those things, like, I was a very introverted CEO when I became a CEO.
Yeah.
And had to sort of, I will say, overcome some things that were hard for me. I'm still an introverted guy. But my experiences growing up, they weren't always pleasant, and I wasn't always happy. I had inner peace, but it was hard. And I look at, like, my first 18 years of life and say, those were the foundation for really forming this mindset of, I can do it. I can charge. I can go hard. And my superpower is that it's not just that I sprint them. It's not just that I finish the marathon. I can sprint it at a pretty fast pace, and I may not win miles 2 or 3, but long term, I think consistency and steadiness and resolve, like, these are the things that matter long term. And so it's so interesting. I thinking back to how, I am who I am, but my early years, my thought process, like, I remember things that I went through when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, and like this very quiet inner determination that I could win long term. But it was a journey.
No, that's so fascinating. I'm rereading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and it's been an every year book for 20 years. And I'm going through some of the stuff, and it's like the first time that I've read it, but I'm at this spot where he's talking about proactivity and going pretty deep in it. And he's talking about Viktor Frankl and man's search for meaning. And there's this part in the book that I'm like, I've read this a lot of times, and how have I never heard this? And he talks about Viktor Frankl. He basically had 3 kind of value sets that he said that people have, how people experience life. He said you experience it experientially, just kind of your circumstance, what happens to you. And I'm thinking about like you as a kid from the Midwest going to England, going to Boston, and those are all like experiences and like hard experiences.
Yep.
But then he talks about a second way that we experience the world, which is creatively. And this is your dreams. This is your goals. This is kind of what you want in the future. This is, it's a really important place to live. You know what I mean? People that succeed exercise that muscle. But then he talks about a third way that we experience it. And he calls it attitudinally. And it's the circumstance that we experience. How do we interpret that? And what does that mean to us? And his thesis is that attitudinally is by far the most important part of how we experience life.
Yeah.
Because you can be in a concentration camp and find meaning. And what you're talking about, you're saying this meant I have a chip in my shoulder. This meant I need to work harder. This meant I need to, and a lot of people wouldn't have that be the meaning.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's so I love what you're saying, and by 7 Habits is like
gold.
It's gold, and it will be forever relevant because it speaks to the human identity and journey, and I think they are timeless principles. You know what? It's interesting because it's important for me to say that the chip on my shoulder was never negative. Like I've never looked around me and said I am disadvantaged. I've never been angry at people more talented than me. I've just always known that I would have to overcompensate. The drive.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me to see that play out over decades. Unfortunately, this quality is only amplifying in me over time. And I would say the why behind what I do has changed a lot. And I think that's one of the most important things I've learned on my journey is that the perfecting the why and doing the right things for the right reasons. I really enjoy that part of it because the drive to make money. I mean, like I've got a lot of drive, and it used to be just to make money and to be successful.
Yeah.
But the evolution of the why has been important. But it's interesting, like decades and decades of just stacking this mindset and going through hard things and waking up and looking in the mirror and say, wow, let's go. Let's figure this out. It's been awesome. And I can interpret it. I can understand it a little bit more looking back.
Yeah.
But I've also learned that, in the grittiest moments, in the hardest moments, the most amazing thing is figuring out that you can be really happy and know you're feeling pain and saying, this is good.
Yeah.
Like this pain's good because I know who I'm becoming. And so, look, I'm just making life up every day and trying to build on the experiences. But I really do look back on early years and say, that was the start. There has never been a magical moment. It's just stacking one moment upon the other every day.
So I want to get into some of those moments because you went from England. How long were you in England?
A couple of years.
Okay. And then you come to the East Coast. You go to Boston. Yep. And Boston was really transformative, right?
It was.
Good education.
Junior high school, very, very strong education.
Yeah.
Spent a few years there, landed in Washington, D.C., where I went to high school. And public schools there were
good,
intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I see my kids and what they're going through, and they're getting a perfectly good education. But I went to a high school, and I will say this through a very positive lens. My school was filled with like very, very committed, Asians, and Jews. And these were my friends, and they were brilliant. And, we had 50 national merit finalists, which is
smokes.
Like, if a school gets 1 or 2. And so, it just, it forced me someone who looked at myself as average relative to the people that I went to school with. If I was going to do well, I just had to raise my game every day.
Because I've got to think, like, I think about my education. And you were talking about Kristen, like Kristen never moved across the road.
Yeah.
That was me growing up. One house, Logan, Utah. And my world was so small. Like, I'd never been on an airplane until I was 17 years old.
Is that right?
Yeah. And my world was small.
Yeah.
Like beautiful.
Yeah.
I loved my upbringing, but small. You know, it was sports. It was my high school girlfriend. It was community. It was faith. And not even really faith. Like for me, I was always kind of a contrarian. So it's like what everybody else is doing, I don't want to do that, you know? But I hear yours and it was way different. Like, and those have to influence. And I think about the emotional muscle that I've got since I left and went on a mission and traveled around the country and had the heart is good. But you kind of had the heart earlier. And I think looking back, that's probably served you really well. You know,
it served me well. And I want to go back to that in a second. I think what you said about your upbringing is super interesting. We go on different journeys in life, but I think there are some very common sort of beliefs and principles and themes that we find. We sort of diverge, but I think we ultimately converge on a few things where we find inner peace and happiness. And, I have realized the simplicity that you're talking about growing up. That is where I'm actually driving toward in my life right now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. And Chris and I've talked a lot about upbringing, and, I got something different out of my upbringing, but there's something that she got out of hers.
Yeah.
That I didn't, that I'm actually looking more for now in my life.
Yeah.
And life can get really complicated, and it can get really fast moving. And sometimes the ability to slow down and value simplicity, value relationships, slow down literally and figuratively, find moments to slow down your mind. I mean, like my days, and I will tell you my last 48 hours of, if I describe the intensity of some of the leadership and board meetings that I sat in related to Traeger, they're insane. I come home and Chris is like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "It was amazing." But I need to sort of bring it down to, I need to sit down with my boys and read Harry Potter. I need to sort of block out the fact that I was in, Korea, Vietnam, and China last week. It's like, I need simplicity for a moment. And, I value the hard. The hard's not over. Actually, some of the hardest things that I've gone through very recently, professionally, but I think it's figuring out, how do you have all of these experiences and not be so close to, sometimes you're so close to them, it's hard to have perspective.
Yeah.
How do I have all of these experiences and be able to sort of step out of the moment?
Yeah.
And whether it be at 5 o'clock in the morning, say, okay, I need perspective before I get in this, like in this meat grinder again today, and remind myself, what am I learning? How am I growing? What matters?
Yeah.
Like, am I going to come home from an intense day and be in my head and not be present and not be kind? Or am I going to remember that what happened today shouldn't change the happiness that I feel when I see my boys, when I see my wife, when I greet my neighbor, taking the trash cans out? And so it's been, I actually love continuing to go through the hard things.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't do well without it. I have learned to thrive in discomfort.
Yeah.
And when it goes away, I just don't know where my growth will come from.
Yeah.
But I've had to realize going through some moments in my life where my perspective was not good. I mean, like my last couple of years at Skullcandy, just almost being not taking care of myself, physically, nutritionally, spiritually, mentally, emotionally.
Out of balance.
I was out of balance
Yeah.
because I was so focused on solving a professional problem that, being the highest shorted stock on the NASDAQ, like all of these things, I wasn't able to go through them and grow in the moment or enjoy my life. And so what I am valuing the most at this point in my life is that I still want to go through these hard things.
Yeah.
And there are moments where I say I prefer winning to learning.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, being able to do both and to have perspective when the bumps are like the most painful, and you sort of say, this is good. This is to my benefit.
So there's so many places I want to go, but I want to like stick to the journey because I actually think it leads to breaking down and diving in and actually like trying to like dissect these, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But specifically, so you go back east, go on a mission.
Yep.
Where'd you go on a mission?
I went to Italy.
Okay.
Which
how rad is that?
do you know,
I'm like, my jealousy of your upbringing is like, it's going up.
By the way, Casey, it's so funny. I remember telling my high school buddies, and I was one of less than a dozen members of my faith in my high school. So when I told my buddies I was leaving for 2 years, they're like, "What are you doing that for?" And then once I explained, I don't know that I totally understood at the time. They found out I was going to Italy. Like, oh, tough spot. And you know what I would say is like that was a continuation of the need to have like real grit. I mean, like Italy's an amazing place. I've lived there. Kristen has studied there. We love it. We're taking our children this summer back to some of the places that I lived. But I will tell you, knocking on hundreds of doors in a day and being yelled at and cursed at and every once in a while fed by a random stranger, but not interested.
Yeah.
Sharing faith in the heart of Catholicism was a hard thing.
Yeah.
If you think about successes, success in sharing your faith, it wasn't that successful for me, but it was a wonderful period of life. So Italy's amazing.
No, but I'm hearing this and like that. So giant Tony Robbins fan.
Yeah.
And there's the language that he uses is that life is happening for you, not to you.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's a philosophical belief that if you can really believe that's like a 100%. Core belief.
Yeah.
I'm like listening to like these.
Yeah.
And if you really think, hey, God is real and there's a plan for me, but also progress is, it's principle based and you can't skip steps.
Yep.
You have to learn algebra before you learn calculus. There's just some algebra and some, some early muscle that I just think like in your journey was required.
It was required. You know what? It was required in part because the things that I've gone through lately, let's say over the last 10 years, without some of those experiences, they would have crushed me.
Broke you.
Like there's no question.
Yeah.
And, I actually love that perspective of believing, stepping back and saying, what is the purpose of my life? I believe in a higher power. I believe that my purpose here is to become someone, to become someone better. And I wouldn't get there without these experiences. And, I didn't always see adversity that way, but I really do now.
Yeah.
Like I really, I love to step back in these moments and say, I believe this is part of a greater plan for me. And therefore, I'm going to tackle these things with gusto and energy. And I don't think they're going to be more than I can get through or handle.
Yeah.
But they stretch me. And being in a place where you feel like you've experienced so much hard in life and then getting stretched further than you think you can handle it,
Yeah.
that's what you need.
Yeah.
And I actually love, Brene Brown is someone I've enjoyed reading. And on the other end of the spectrum, David Goggins, someone that's been through hard things, and they approach it from very different perspectives, but I think their perspectives are equally valuable. And it's that there's this sort of messy middle that you have to go through to get to the other side. Like, where you are, and there is no way to circumvent it unless you give up. And that's just never been an option for me. And those experiences, boy, bring them on. It's like, let's go. They are making me who I am.
I had this, there's a friend of mine, a female friend. She's a nurse, and she's a rock star. Like, she's incredible, but she has this home business where they do, IVs and, telemedicine and really cool business. And she, has done it for somebody else, and now she's doing it on her own. And she comes over yesterday, and we're talking and we're going through things, and she's trying to get into this nursing program that would be like it'd give her like a real opportunity, and not too many people get in, and she didn't get in. And it just, it was really tough. And also, she's just starting her own business, and she's like, the fear is paralyzing.
Yeah.
It's paralyzing to me right now. And this is somebody that was a college athlete, and from the outside looking in, you're like, you're a rock star. Like, you have this. But what she was describing, and we talked about it, and it was like this beautiful moment. She broke down and there is a threshold of control that all of us are really comfortable in.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not the growth zone.
It's not.
And unless you're willing to go push the limits, you'll be damned. You'll be stopped.
Yep.
You'll stagnate. And ultimately, you're not going to be happy.
Totally.
Like, progress equals happiness. You know what I mean?
It does. And it's, and pushing the limits it's kind of it's a decision.
Yeah.
It really is.
Especially when you get a level of success.
Yes.
Because I think there's a point where it's not really a decision. It's like, I either work or I don't eat. Right? Like,
yes.
There's a desperation kind of space that I think most people get through.
Yeah.
It's like, I got to get to this level of comfort, and I'll do whatever it takes to get there. It's almost 100%. Like a thermometer in the room, and it's too cold, and we gotta. But then there's also you get there, and then you're there. You know what I mean? And it's how do you push the limits?
You're there if you think you're there. But one of the things I learned very early on, and there was a moment where I felt like I had arrived at my earliest ambitions. Like, I want to be an entrepreneur when I was 6, 7, 8 years old and starting businesses. I always knew. I didn't know the word entrepreneur, but I always knew what I wanted to become. I wanted to be an entrepreneur and a CEO of a business that mattered. And I remember the day that I got there, and it was incredible. It felt so good. And I got 24 hours beyond that and said, now what? It's like this was the mountain peak I was looking at.
Yeah.
But it was a false summit. I see all sorts of other ones around me. And I actually have some very close friends from business school who made money early. They started companies. They made a ton of money, and they got to their late 30s, early 40s, and they stopped. They said, I've arrived. And they spent time doing things that they had always hoped they could do. They got their golf handicap down, and you name it. They were able to buy every toy and do everything they needed to. And eventually a moment came where they said, I just the next thing I buy doesn't make me happier.
Yeah.
I can only buy so many Ferraris. And unfortunately, the dopamine hit of the first one no longer means anything. And unfortunately, in some of those cases, what I have seen is that they just don't know how to reengage.
Yeah.
They just don't know where to start. They've been out of it for many years, and they built their life not realizing that the hard that they were going through was this self-perpetuating, like this was growth.
Yo.
And they lost that. And I think when growth stops, it's hard. And this is something that I really, there are things that I will say I preach to my team, like my team of 700 people around the world all the time. And it's, growth in our career is so much more important than outcomes, because there's never an outcome that says, I'm done now.
Yo.
What, like, who wants to say, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, my best is behind me?
Yo.
It's like it's in front of me, and that requires growth. And growth is I think it's the great, like, becoming better is what makes us feel better about ourselves.
Yo.
And I think it's always interesting to think about from our own personal motivation perspective and from a leader's perspective, what are the inputs versus what are the outputs? Success, like, outputs are important to success, but the inputs of how we lead, how we develop people, how we develop ourselves, those are actually the things that matter the most, so that we're not focused. There is no moment in time where we've accomplished all. And I've just found you get there and it's like, it was the journey that mattered more than the moment.
Go to college. So you went to BYU.
Yep.
Out of BYU, what was the next step?
So next step was, I became a management consultant.
Okay.
Which is like, and I say that because for someone who believed he wanted to be an entrepreneur, there's nothing further from entrepreneurship than being a management consultant.
But that had to help you though, right?
It was, so there was a strategy behind it.
Yeah.
Like, I knew where I wanted to land.
It was deliberate.
Yeah. This was an investment.
Yeah.
And I wanted to become smarter intellectually. I wanted to understand strategy better. And it was a grind. I mean, it was a 7-day-a-week, deeply analytical, heavy research,
Monitor,
and modeling.
Right?
Monitor.
Yep. And was that with David? Was that when you met David?
David Bywater.
Yeah,
it is. David was actually, when I was a summer intern, he was my manager back in Cambridge. And by the way, love him to death, respected him from the first day I met David, just like a leader, brilliant, a grinder, good perspective on life. And boy, did he drive me hard. But I chose after that summer experience to become a management consultant. And it wasn't because I loved every day of it. It was actually 10 really hard weeks of my life.
Yeah.
But I look back and said, in 10 weeks, I learned a lot. And so I got 90 days into consulting. Literally, I ended up joining Monitor in Santa Monica. And I got 90 days in, and there were very few weeks that weren't 7 days a week. And I remember waking up on a Saturday morning and just groaning and feeling, there are only 2 days in my life that I remember waking up and feeling depressed. Like 2 days. That was one, and another was on my mission. And I woke up and I was worn out. I wasn't enjoying anything about what I was doing. It was just a disciplined grind day after day. And I woke up and it's like 7 o'clock in the morning, and I've always been an early riser, and I can't get it. I'm like, oh, I can't go in today. And it's 7:30, it's 8 o'clock. And I call my dad on the East Coast, and it's like, he's getting ready to sit down for lunch. And I'm like, Dad, I've made the biggest mistake of my life. Like, maybe I should have gone to law school or gone into medicine. Like, I'm miserable every day. And my dad chuckled a little bit. And I've actually learned a lot more about my dad's career journey than I understood growing up. And he said, you're 90 days in. Just keep your feet moving. You got to get out of bed today. Just keep your feet moving. You don't have to do this forever, but you also don't want to quit after 90 days. And I begrudgingly got out of bed, and I did that for I did that for a couple of years, but I had to focus on, it was pure discipline and grit every day.
There was a crossroads. There was a get off the Get off the highway or stay on.
It was. Wow. And I said, okay, I got to keep going. But there was a moment in time, there was a moment in my career, and I did some random things. Like I bounced back between I'm investing in my future and I'm doing what I want to do. That things that were opportunistic. As a consultant, I started day trading stocks, and I did that for 6 months. And I was loving the adrenaline. I turned, my $100,000 of lawn mowing money and sort of business money growing up into $2.5 million at 25 years old.
This story I want to take some time on.
Okay,
this is a beautiful story.
Okay,
so one, I want to go through the mentality. I
love that you call this a beautiful story. No, one of the hardest things I've ever been through.
No, I absolutely love this story. So the first one is you're 25.
Yeah.
Haven't been to business school yet.
No.
So, but you're
goal was to go back to Harvard Business School.
Done with college.
Yep.
Doing, you're on the track. When you think about hey, what's the track? Go get some great consulting experience. Yep. It's really broad. Go,
This was my strategy.
Yeah, but
this is my plan.
The trade, it's actually not a bad trade. It's we're going to go work you to the bone.
Yep.
We're going to take our pound of flesh.
Yep.
And you're going to get a good resume, something for your resume, and you're going to get some great experience.
Exactly.
And you kind of got that. The bargain kind of worked out. They got your life and you got some experience.
Yep.
But you had this one that you had $100,000 extra. I love, because it's, this
thousands of lawns,
this industriousness that you created a nest egg. But talk to me about because these lessons matter a lot. You making, I'll let you tell the story because I want to break this down because I had a similar experience at 25.
Yeah.
And it changed my life. It was hard medicine.
Hard medicine. Well, I'll first say part of, I was an investor early in life. I mean, I was investing in things in high school with my dad. And I bought stocks in college, and I bought a rental property and I renovated it. And so my passion for investing was as great as my passion for building business. And
what do you think that was?
I love thinking about creation and building.
Yeah.
And by the way, I also I grew up with not a lot of money. And so early on, I realized that if I made money, if I delivered the papers at 5 a.m. in a cold Minnesota Sunday morning, I got to buy Nikes and not get what my parents would buy me.
Wow.
And so I was always frugal, and I always like to enjoy a few nice things. And that just said, money and financial independence is something that I'm going to have.
Just you were committed to it.
I was committed to it, from an early age, and so
let me stop right there because I think it's important to I love that you own it, that you just said, I want this in my life, and this is really important. I think there's some weird, even kind of not productive paradigms or views on money, that I think hurt people. You know what I mean? Having a healthy relationship with money and what it is and what it isn't.
Absolutely.
And you guys, obviously, I don't know of people that give as hard as you guys. You guys are real examples to Chelsea and I of you grow and you create it so you have more to give. But you wanted it early. And I think
that
that's
wasn't
really
where
important.
I started.
Yeah.
What I wanted early was money for me and my family.
Yeah.
And now again, back to the why shifting over time, money is still the scorecard in business. And it's really funny when I say I want more of it, it's for two reasons. Number one, my investors, I hope they love the business I'm building, but their scorecard is only money. It's only the return.
Yeah.
And the second is, Kristen and I have found real joy in sharing and in giving away. And it's the only way I can justify making more money because we're not leaving it to our kids.
Yeah.
We are going to bounce our last check. And so, but when I was day trading, it was all about the spreadsheet, and I kept the spreadsheet. And it started very slowly. I mean, this was like late 90s. The internet stocks are going crazy, and the markets are very volatile, which is a day trader's dream. It's a dream.
Yeah.
And I make a trade and I sell it hours later and I make like $5,000. And I'm like, and by this, as a consultant, I'm making $40,000 a year plus bonus. And I make $5,000 like in a trading day. And I tried it again. And I tried it again. And eventually I'm making dozens of trades a day. I'm trading, in and out $1, $2, $3 million a day, like really quickly. And some days I make 20, some days I lose 20. And I will say what I learned is when you have a lot of leverage, margin leverage, and the market's going up, and you are long not short the market, you can make money and not be that great.
Yeah.
And so I just I put it on the line every day, and I just kept making money. And you know what? It's like one day I had $2.5 million. Now, unfortunately, the trades got bigger and bigger, and I started believing in the late 90s that the markets were overvalued. So I started shorting things. I started shorting internet stocks that you've never heard of. And you haven't heard of them because they don't exist, but they were worth billions of dollars. And I felt confident in my thesis. I look back and realize that
you were right.
I was right. But I did it the wrong way, and my timing was off.
Yeah.
And then I went through a period of, I will say, 90 days that were very toxic and very destructive, where I couldn't sleep at night. I was so stressed.
Straight up addicted.
Addicted's a wrong word. So I had loved the adrenaline of it, but I got myself into a situation that I didn't know how to unwind.
Yeah.
I was short stocks that were going up and up and up. You don't know, do I cover today? Do I cut my losses? I was losing $100,000 a day, a week. And then I got to a place where I was waking up I was going to bed at midnight, and I was waking up at 3 a.m. I would check to see what's going on in the Asian exchanges. I would be in the office to see what was going on, in the European markets. I was only trading on the NASDAQ. But it was crushing me. It was so painful and it was so difficult. And I had so little perspective because I was trying to recover something.
And probably no one sees this because it's almost like it was inward. This is you and the computer.
It's me and the computer. By the way, I'm still a consultant at this time. Like, I'm a consultant, and people come in at 5 and 6 in the morning. They see me in there working. They assume that I'm staffed and busy. And I'm trying not to show my stress. But there was a moment where it all ended. And when it ended, it was devastating, but beautiful at the same time. And I actually remember I was with my then girlfriend named Kristen, not the woman I married. But we're driving to Southern California, which is where I lived. She was in Provo, just graduated, and I'm helping her move to Southern California. And E-Trade called me, and they said they had suspended my account, and I owed them $200,000. Started with 100, grew it to 2.5, and I was at negative $200,000.
That was a year, that's 6 months. What was that full cycle?
So I was 6 months of very successful day trading, and I was 90 days from it starting to sort of unwind.
Yeah.
Until this phone call.
Yeah.
And I didn't talk for the next 3 hours. I was somewhere beyond Vegas, but not to Southern California. And I was I almost had this out of body moment, which is I worked so hard for that $100,000. But it wasn't just financially. I was having these thoughts of, is this going to ruin me? Like, where am I going next? Eventually, and it took me weeks for my thoughts to go from like, this is a disaster. This is the end of me. And by the way, I look back and say, what a ridiculous train of thought.
Yeah.
But I also realized that I was so close to something so difficult. I just didn't know how to step outside of it.
Yeah.
No perspective. And then my mindset started shifting to, this hasn't ruined me and there's something to learn. And I remember sitting down and writing the things that I learned about my career.
Oh my gosh.
And part of it was consulting.
You still have that?
Oh, absolutely. I keep these things. I am a writer.
Yeah.
But what I've learned, and I learned this post my Skullcandy experience, I don't write in complete sentences when I'm writing learnings.
Yeah.
Because the risk is that I wait to perfect it. I just jot and I jot and I jot.
Have you gone back and like referenced it?
Oh, absolutely. And so thought number one was, I wasn't creating any value. I was just getting in between people's value. Like I wasn't building anything.
Arbitraging.
I was just arbitraging. So I wasn't building anything.
Wow.
Thought number two, I had no control. Like I don't control Amazon going up and down. I want to control my outcome.
Yeah.
Thought number three, this made me a bad person. Like I was miserable and I want to do things that make me better. Thought number four, I want to be more responsible. I have a high propensity for risk. I continue to. I mean, like I was sitting in a board meeting a couple of days ago, and I'm like in an impassioned way saying, guys, like we got to be risk takers. Like we're not done. This is a $600 million business. There's still risks that we need to take to grow better and faster. Yeah. But I'm a risk taker, but I realize that taking stupid risk will leave you either feeling good or feeling bad, but you didn't control either one. So taking measured risk, taking intelligent risk is smart. I remember thinking, I've now experienced two parts of my career, management consulting and day trading, which were not good for me. I learned lessons in both of them, but I needed to figure out not what I learned for good, but what I learned about myself.
Yeah.
Like, what did I learn about who I am, what my disposition is, and how do I take the lessons to my next gig? And I did. And it's like, what I do next, I did the opposite of like fast pace, get in between trades, don't build anything. I started building real estate. I started like finding dirt and working with cities and seeing foundations go in and sticks go out of the ground. And, it's like, and by the way, I went from one extreme to another and I got very bored in real estate.
Yeah.
I loved the finished product, but it was too slow.
Yeah.
And so, but that moment of, I remember the moment driving in the U-Haul and I can't even describe what I was feeling. It was like, it wasn't spiritual, but it was deep and I was almost floating and it was painful. It wasn't pleasant. And, it took me a while to recover enough to say that I can't repeat this. I need to be more thoughtful about what just happened.
I think about this idea of change coming from inspiration and desperation.
Yeah.
It usually comes from the extremes.
Yes.
Like just like you're just, somebody lights you on fire.
100%.
Or you just hit rock bottom.
I hit rock bottom.
And, one's more pleasant.
Yeah.
But they both inspire change. And I think just listening to you, and I can see it from the outside, but you and Kristen are so deliberate. You're thoughtful. When you act, it's not haphazard. There's like a method to the madness, but you've kind of been programmatic with this your whole life. Like even the decision to go into consulting, it was a deliberate decision.
It was.
And the breakdown, like what I would say is I think that ability that you have, maybe you don't even realize it, it's rare to do the autopsy.
There was an autopsy.
The autopsy's hard.
Yes, it
the
is.
postmortem, and to just really like break it down that like this is what I'm going to do going forward, but as if not more importantly, this is what I'm not going to do. And then the second piece is this is who I want to be.
Yeah.
And this is who I don't want to be, which like, man, that's the goal.
It is. And I will say like autopsy is actually a perfect word for it. And it's perfect in part because it was a near death moment for me. I mean, like of my soul. But the other is that it's really hard to deeply acknowledge the truth because you have to go to a place that hurts.
Scary.
It's scary. And like interestingly, and this was also another lesson for me, I could have caught myself in those 90 days at any moment in time. I could have stopped and caught myself and done this. I didn't have the capability at that point in time. And I also didn't want to acknowledge the truth.
And maybe even the controls. There's a piece of it, like even like, what are the processes and systems that I'm going to check in on myself?
So that's actually a really important part of it. The lesson wasn't just what I do and what happened, but how do I find myself in a bad spot, potentially spiraling?
Yeah.
And saying, if I stop here, that's better than stopping here.
Me and my wife, we have a beautiful marriage. Like, we have a beautiful marriage. I think we have an exceptional marriage, but we fight like any other couple. And it was about a year ago that, we were fighting more than I think we ever had in our marriage. And I think it was a combo of just 5 kids, her deciding to go back to do her MBA. We just signed up for more.
Yeah.
And I think the pressures of it.
Yeah.
And we would get in these funks and it would take us too long to get out of them. And we had this experience somewhere where we, talked about it and just said, we always get out of them.
Yeah.
We're going to have these in the future.
Yeah.
What's like how do we like stop it earlier?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we had an experience where like got in a funk, stopped it, talked about it, stopped it quick, go make love, which is like usually what fixes everything.
That helps. Yep.
and I'm sitting there at the end of it and I'm like, wow, like that was a moment right there.
Totally.
We're actually talking about it saying like our turnaround cycle is quicker. You know what I mean? And I'm like,
there's so much in what you just said. And actually you'll remember that when that happened, like there's this rush of confidence, which is we can do this.
Yeah.
Like we grew from that. And, this to me it's one of the most important parts of life. It's seeing a pattern and then learning that you can recognize it the second time around or the third time around, you can change it. And then you have this rush of confidence. You have a capability.
Yeah.
And finding that, saying, I actually can change. And I will say, I have this philosophy as a business leader that we don't have time as an organization for people to make like really dramatic changes to themselves. Like we want to develop people, but someone that is far from a fit, like we don't have time and they're a bad fit. And so I think people sometimes interpret that as a cynical perspective on humans' ability to change. And what I will say is I have changed over time and I have a very strong disposition. What I've realized is that change has to be very deliberate.
Yeah.
You can't change more than one thing and it takes a long time.
Yeah.
But when you do, the feeling of confidence, which is I can be better than I am, is an incredible feeling.
Yeah. So I had my 25-year-old experience doing door-to-door sales, kind of success, bigger success. I mean, it was 2004, 5, 6. And similar to the late 90s, like I'm buying real estate.
Mm-hmm.
I still remember my first experience buying a home. I went out and I worked the summer, never worked harder in my life, and made $50,000. And I come back and buy a house that's worth $250, and somehow it appraises for $300. The world was just, stuff was appreciating by
Things
the
were
month.
moving fast. Yep.
And at the closing, they said, "Do you want a check for $50,000?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that'd be fantastic."
How could I say no?
And so I get a check at closing for the gap between my purchase and the house, and it's a loan, it's tax free. And I'm like, I just killed myself for 4 months, and then I just got 50, the same number, except I don't pay taxes. And that was like this erroneous lesson of how life worked with real estate. And I got the same lesson that you got. It was good until it wasn't.
Yeah.
Bigger. The third double down, it's me and Chels, and we're building a $1.2 million house at 24 years old.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, yeah, we're going to be in at 850. It's going to be in at $1.2 million. It's the same thing I just did before. And then the music stopped.
Yeah.
And the company I'm with goes out of business. I'm underwater in the house.
Mm.
I remember like calling this bank in Omaha, the Bank of Omaha or something, and saying, "I just lost my job. I'm $200,000 underwater in this house. Like, we're not going to be able to go long term on construction." I said, "And I'm going to go work commission sales, selling door to door." I'm like, "What do you guys want to do?" And so like work it out with the bank to give, to short sell the house. But that was my like rock bottom, scary moment.
But how important was that moment for you?
Well, there's 2 lessons. The first one was, I'm an idiot. Like, it really was. Like, who is the dumbest guy in the world? And I'm like, this guy. Like, but then when you look at the total landscape, you're like, I think there was a herd mentality.
Yeah.
And I think I was just in the herd.
Yep.
The second one was, I went out and sold door to door. And 2 pieces of it. One, I was always too prideful or too good for that industry until it was the only thing that I had. And then I embraced it.
You ground it hard.
And I saw this guy, Todd Peterson, that he was really proud of his industry. Yeah. He loved it. He was proud of what he built. He put on the Vivint hat and show everywhere he went. He was proud. And I was ashamed that I was door-to-door sales rep. And in the moment I said, not ashamed anymore. If it's good enough for him. And I made $600,000+ in 8 months.
Oh my gosh.
When the world's imploding.
That is adult money.
The world's imploding. Yeah. Everybody that I had that had professional jobs were losing them. Real estate, investment banking.
Yeah.
Like the world it was scary times. And I made the most money that I'd ever made. And I got this insight that I have a capability. I can control my future. Absolutely. And it was so empowering to me to say that the external world is going to do what it does, but there's things within my power that I can control the outcome. And it was life-changing.
It's so empowering.
It was life-changing for me.
It is. I love that experience. I also think that you would never have learned that lesson had you not had skin in the game.
Yeah.
And it's something that Chris and I think about a lot. It's like, if we're going to make a difference, like if we're going to grow and provide value, we've got to have skin in the game.
And you got to be in the arena.
You've got to. Yeah. You've got to be in it. There was no other way.
Yeah. So you go back to Harvard.
Yeah.
Get that education. When did it switch from that to because you were trying a couple more things. Yeah. Like it was just like you were like iterating until it hit,
Harvard was always the ambition. And, after applying the second time and getting in.
So first time you got denied.
First time I got denied.
Like, I think that matters so much. Like, I'm just telling you, you don't see this, but when people look at your life from the outside, they see good looking family, BYU grad, Harvard Business School grad, consulting, public CEO one, like they see this linear,
oh my gosh,
really beautiful track.
And let me dispel any of the myth. My career has had more failure than success. Like the bumps have been bigger than the mountains have
But
been.
no one sees it. And I think that's
You
the
don't see
lie.
it.
Like, I think that's.
I like to tell the truth because I want people to listen to this and say, I'm not alone. Is this really how it goes for successful people? It is. You can't circumvent the messy middle. And you know, so I didn't get in the first time, and I was 13 years old when I decided I was going to Harvard Business School. I knew my bishop was a very successful CEO. He'd gone to Harvard, and I said I'm going to do the same. And I remember I was able to arrange a 15-minute meeting with the dean of Harvard Business School, guy named Kim Clark.
Clark.
Yeah. And I reached out, and he gave me 15 minutes. I got on an airplane. I went to Boston for 15 minutes, 15-minute meeting, and we sat down. And there were no pleasantries, and I love and admire this person. I've come to know him since. We sat down, and he said, Jeremy, how can I help you? And I was in this big, beautiful, 300-year-old office, like ornate, decorated. And I cut right to the chase. I said, I decided a long time ago I was going to Harvard Business School. I didn't get in this time, and I'm here for 10 minutes of your advice. And then I just want to tell you something at the end. And I asked him some questions. He shared some thoughts. He wasn't going to waste much time with me. And at the end, I said, you are going to see my application over and over and over. I will not go to the next step in life without going to Harvard Business School. I did get in the next time. Now I also worked twice as hard on the application.
Yeah.
But then I was finished and I said, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
I want to be an entrepreneur. And so I co-founded a business with my cousin. And that's a whole other podcast. My cousin Brock is one of my best friends. And he's one of the I'll say highest energy, craziest human beings I know. And the business, I'll say first of all, I had just met my now wife, Kristen.
Yeah.
We met at a wedding. And on one of our first dates, probably our third or fourth date, we stopped by Barnes & Noble because I had been featured in Business Week. And Harvard Business School had found my name. And apparently I was named as someone who wasn't employed post Harvard Business School. This is in 2002 where the economy was tough. And I was an entrepreneur living in my parents' basement. And I went through a series of interviews. They came and took pictures of me. I was excited to see it. I was proud to show this woman that I was head over heels for. And we open up this publication, and there's a centerfold picture of a very depressed Jeremy Andrus sitting in his parents' basement.
Oh my gosh.
With the title, Hi Mom, Hi Dad, I'm Home. And I'm like, shut that magazine. And Chris is like, no, let's read it. Like, this is great. And she's trying not to laugh.
It's like a hit job.
And I'm devastated. And you know what? They told the story they were looking to tell. And I became an entrepreneur. And you know what? It was not overwhelmingly successful.
Yeah.
You have not heard of this business. And my cousin and I had a very tough break as partners and friends. We are very, very close friends, but it was hard, and I had to go get a job because I needed money to pay back my business school. And so there were some bumps, but I ended up in San Francisco with a perfectly good paying job. I was making $100,000 a year for the first time, and that felt like a lot of money in 2004. And I was with Kristen on a weekend. We were dating and sort of seeing each other on the weekends by Southwest Airlines. And I got a voice message from a buddy of mine back home who I'd grown up with. And he said, hey, check out this, go to skullcandy.com. I know the founder. It's a couple of guys. They just got a website. And I remember going to this. And there was this raw, like 10-second heavy metal music track that just kept repeating. And you just can't remember how bad websites were at the time. And it was this integrated snowboard helmet, audio phone, mobile phone business. And I remember thinking, I'm bored. Like I'm paying back my business school $700 a month over 30 years. This is just not me. I am a builder and I'm not building anything right now. And 2 weeks later, I found myself packing up my old Ford Explorer, leaving my old HBS furniture in my studio apartment that had a small table, a single chair, a knife, a fork, a spoon. Chris gave me so much crap that when I bought the table, I didn't buy two chairs.
Just Spartan.
She decided, it's like, why did you buy two chairs? It's like, aren't you going to need two chairs someday? I'm like, don't read into it. I was just too cheap to buy the second chair. And I called my landlord driving east on the 80. And I said, I'm leaving. Can you throw my furniture out? And he said, tell you what, I'll throw it out if I can keep your deposit. Like, done, next. And all the while I'm negotiating with my partner, the founder of Skullcandy, as I'm driving to Park City, Utah to move back into my parents' basement for the second time after college, and became an entrepreneur.
And you're how old? Is it?
31 years old.
So it like
32 years old.
It truly is like, and you're in this world all the time. I'm sure you get hit for people to come talk to you like you went and talked to Kim Clark. You know, young, ambitious, driven kids. 31, like you still hadn't found it. You were trying and trying and trying, and you hadn't. And then it was like all of a sudden, like the seed hits fertile soil and like that.
Well, so interestingly, I hadn't found it. I wasn't giving up. I was worrying a little bit that I now had a lot of logos on my resume.
Yeah.
And the last resume I updated was 2002 when I graduated from Harvard Business School. And I will tell you, and by the way, it wasn't all downhill from there. I showed up to Skullcandy, and I was 72 hours in when I knew I'd made the worst mistake of my life. And I'll just say, and I have since, my partner at Skullcandy, and I love Rick Alden. I am so grateful for what I learned, for the platform that we built. We had some great moments together, but he was hard partner. He was a hard partner.
Yeah.
And, I showed up and I got to day 4 where my partner, Rick Alden, comes in my office and he puts his face in his hands and he kind of groans and he said, we have a problem. And I'm like, what's the problem? He said, we're out of money. I'm like, oh, like I knew he was a tough partner before this moment. Like it didn't take me long to figure this out. And we're out of money. I've just left all of my furniture behind and moved into my parents' basement. I've just quit a job. It was a terrible economy. It was not a good economy for MBAs, which is what Business Week highlighted with me as a poster child. And I sat there and I just like through my mind, I was racing the thoughts, this is happening again. And like, you can't quit. Like you can't quit 4 days into this thing. So what did I do? I took the $20,000 that I had saved up in San Francisco and I wired it to Rick Alden's personal account so that he could pay our factory and pay the 3 employees. Now, I didn't get paid for many years, and I eventually married a woman who was the breadwinner of our family and put the down payment down for our first house. But I just said, and by the way, I will share, there was a lesson that came from that moment. And I had that lesson one other time, 4 months into Traeger, which is I might have quit had I had a choice. I was
chips in the middle.
I was, I said, this was a mistake. This was a big mistake. But I said, I cannot fail 4 days in. Like, I cannot add yet another resume. No one's going to hire me. The need, and I will say also, like, I left 8 years later, and when I left Skullcandy, my thought was I stayed too long. Like, I stayed beyond the moment that it was healthy for me. But I'm really grateful that in that moment, and that when I was 4 months into Traeger, had written a check for most of the money that we made at Skullcandy, that in that case was different. I couldn't walk away because I'd hired 4 of my friends from Skullcandy to be executives. Not being able to walk away and realize that quitting too early you will never find success if you quit too early. And yet there are moments to walk away.
Yeah.
And like, and people have asked me, say more about that. And I will share the experiences and say, those experiences only apply to me. They only apply to these moments.
But life's a dance, really.
Life's a dance. There's a lot of art. There's more art than science.
And there's extremes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's not one or the other. And I think it's easier when it's just like paint by numbers, you know? It's like, hey, do this, this.
It is.
But that's not really how life works, you know?
It's not. The reason I'm so grateful that I didn't quit in that moment and I put my final chips in the middle was that I found my love at I found my professional love at Skullcandy. Like, I'd zigzagged so many, like, from consulting to day trading to building hotels to being a marketing intern in the golf industry and being an investment banker for 10 weeks in London between years of business school. I mean, like, what am I doing? Like, some of these things I look back and say,
you were trying a lot of stuff.
I was trying a lot of stuff. I was trying a lot. And actually, I learned when I found my love at Skullcandy, it took me a couple of years, that all of those experiences I had led me to where I was.
So there's one of my favorite thought leaders is a guy named Tom Peters. And he has this book called The Excellence Dividend.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this phrase in it that almost describes perfectly what you're describing. He says, the people and companies that try the most stuff win.
Yep.
And the people and companies that screw the most stuff up win. And I think about you just trying a lot of things and screwing up a lot of things. But I think
it was important.
I think getting a healthy relationship with failure.
Yeah.
And just putting it in context that there really are no failures. There's only outcomes.
There are outcomes. And failure is a journey to success.
Yeah.
As long as you don't quit after your last failure.
Yeah.
And I was probably 2 or 3 years in when I started coming home to Kristen and saying, like, I love this. It's like, I love building product. I love thinking about innovation. And it's like, and this didn't come in a moment, but I realized, boy, brand is fun.
Yeah.
Like, it's fun to create emotion with a consumer. Manufacturing in China is it's a trip. It's cool. And, I finally, I joined Skullcandy. Well, it was March 16th of 2005. And I am almost 20 years from then.
Wow.
And I've done 2 things. And so it's interesting. Like, I churn through experiences and logos
to find it.
But when I found it, it was all worth it.
Yeah.
It really was.
I think about this diagram of like what you're passionate about, like what the market is willing to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then like what customers need.
Yep.
And like that like space in the middle, if you can find that space.
That's
like,
the holy grail. That's it right there.
My heart is in this.
It's amazing.
The world will pay me for it.
Yes.
And customers want it. And it feels like both Skullcandy and Traeger, found this space of like, I was made for this.
It's almost magic. It really is. And like what was interesting is Skullcandy was quantity. It's like I had to try a bunch of things. Traeger was deliberate. It was It was stepping back and taking and really building a blueprint
Yeah.
from everything that happened at Skullcandy. And you acknowledge the things that went well, and you want to repeat those things. And there's a lot of that in Traeger, but there was a blueprint for things that I didn't do well.
You gave me the breakdown of what were the 4 things that you learn on day trading. What breakdown would you give kind of post-mortem of Skullcandy?
Oh my gosh. So I'll give you the top 3 or 4 lessons and I'll stop then. Number 1, culture is everything. We built a culture at Skullcandy that I was willing to sacrifice over time. I didn't do it intentionally, but when things got hard, I was willing to tolerate bad leaders who were bad for our culture because they were good at what they did, and I feared losing their capability. Number 1, culture is not only built deliberately, but it is something you protect with your life every day.
How profound is that?
It is the only true X factor that you have in an organization. Like when you step back and say, we have product, brand, strategy, operations, IP, culture is the only X factor.
And give me your definition of culture.
Culture for me, like ultimately what culture is, it's how you feel when you walk into a place.
Yeah.
A physical place with other people. And it's interesting. And sometimes you can live culture, you can become so callous to the experience that you're having that you don't see it from the outside in. And I was speaking to a group of salespeople that had just joined our company. This is 2 days ago, Wednesday afternoon. They're just finishing a 3-day training course. And this one guy said, hey, I need to say this. I have never felt what I feel here. When I sat in with 300 people in your company meeting, in the Abbey, eating together and feeling the energy, I've never felt that before.
Oh.
And I have never felt walking down a hall supported by someone who stops and says, how's your first week going? And so like, what is culture ultimately is something, well, I think it does 2 things. First, I think you step back and say, what am I building? Like, what is my vision for this organization? And how do I build a set of cultural values that ensures that if we live them collectively, if every individual and together we live these, we will accomplish my vision. And so it's breaking down vision to a certain number of shared values.
Yeah.
And like diversity of background and experience and perspective, these are all important. But the only way to scale decision-making around vision is to know that you have people that have bought into your cultural values. So that's sort of number 1. The second is that, it's so interesting. And I did this early in my career as a leader. It's like, you're demanding and you're competitive. And it's like, guys, we're here to win. Let's go. We can do more. And you want to motivate people, but pounding your fist and doing things that make people feel almost uncomfortable, it's ultimately produces minimum threshold results.
Yeah.
But when someone walks into a space, and I said physical space, in this world, culture transcends the space. Like we have offices all over the world.
Yeah.
When someone thinks about the organization they're a part of and they interact and they collaborate with the team, and what they feel is, I'm unlocking my best self. I am a better person because of how this organization makes me feel. I am willing to stretch harder because it feels good. I want to give more to my team. All of these things that bring out the best in human beings, ultimately the inputs of an organization, they are your people and they are how you develop your people. And the output is it's winning. It's the P&L. It's the stock price.
Yeah.
And so I would say that at Skullcandy, we sort of built that unintentionally. Like we built people that shared our vision, they shared our DNA. And we started with like the three of us, and we built from there. Traeger, about a 27-year-old business. And I loved the business case and the business opportunity, but I didn't understand what happened when you got behind the walls of an old building, and there are all sorts of surprises. And I bought a business that was like organizationally sick. It was unhealthy. The culture was terrible. It was toxic. And so it was really interesting for me to see, to see what it feels like to walk into a place. And I'll say this is interesting because this showed up on my time hop a few weeks ago. I'm 11 years and a few weeks into my Traeger experience, and seeing a picture of me sitting at this like very depressing, humble desk in Springville in our sales office, and having for the second moment in my career saying, I've made the biggest mistake of my life. Now, of course, that turned out to not be true. But what I learned was this was going to be a heavy lift.
Yeah.
This was going to be a grind. And it really all came down to partnering with people that wanted the experience that I was looking to build, and just deciding that culture is a very deliberate thing. You build it deliberately and you protect it. And there are moments, even after you build it, you can say you believe in it, but you can unknowingly, unwittingly
Compromise it.
it. And so it's to me, it's like you will always figure out your business strategy, your product strategy, your brand, your operations. And of course, like capability matters. It matters the way that culture matters, but while capability has to get better every day in your organization, capability without culture, it really doesn't produce an exceptional outcome. It produces an okay business.
Wow. So lesson 1, culture's everything. Lesson 2 is what?
Lesson 2, sometimes you gotta like completely rip it apart and rebuild it. That was, we had to start over. We started with 110 people in Oregon, our headquarter office, and I brought 3 of them with me. We had to rebuild it, and we had to rebuild it with a very long-term view in mind.
This is Traeger.
This is Traeger.
Yeah, it's Traeger.
This is Traeger. This is a $70 million business that we very easily could have broken, but I knew that we couldn't build something special if we weren't willing to make really hard decisions.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I brought in a private equity partner with me who was a little bit more risk averse. And I'm like, and they were the governor on this thing. I'm like, let's go. Like, we're doing this and this and this. I am not willing to fail because the people around me want me to fail, and they wanted me to fail.
Yeah.
But I would say that was a starting point of creating a little bit of a blank sheet of paper. And then it takes me to the third thing that I learned deeply at Skullcandy, which is you cannot cut corners in building a business. You build a business and you do the right thing. You make the right investments every single day, and eventually you get rewarded for those things. And you actually don't get rewarded necessarily in the moment that you should. Businesses sort of like they grow in fits and starts, and especially consumer brands. And, at Skullcandy, we built this incredible brand. And then we took it public, and public investors didn't like it. And so I found myself making compromises along the way. Let's spend less in brand. No one will feel it for a quarter or two, and we can flow it to the bottom line. Let's invest a little bit less in product. So it's not going to affect this year. It's like 2 years out. And you eventually have to pay the piper when you make those decisions. But when you make good decisions and you say, I am investing in the long term, I know we won't get rewarded for this anytime soon. When you stack good decisions every day upon good decisions, and you do it with a team of people that are fully bought in terms of the strategy and the culture and the business, you do eventually get rewarded. And I say that I believe that, and we did that at Traeger. We built a business from $70 million that had taken 27 years to get to $70 million. And within the same infrastructure, 10 years later it was like 10 times that size.
Yeah.
Um, but it's easy on the way up when you're growing. And I would say we've had to revisit culture. I mean, like in 2022, when things got tough again, it's like, is our culture still good? And the reality was that it slipped.
Yeah.
Are we willing to invest when we don't have two nickels to rub together in what we believe in? And so I think building a blueprint and deciding what are my guiding principles in this business and making sure that you revisit them because you can stray. You build them in a moment of calm, but when you really need them is in the moment of chaos.
I mean, what you're giving right now is like gold. Like, it's lessons that, you know,
these are
hard won lessons.
These are my lessons of life. But what I really do love about business is that, and I don't want to trivialize it. You do have to be smart, and you do have to build a really capable team and a really smart team. But what I believed as a management consultant was that, like, the X factor was the strategy. What I now believe is that it is in the culture, it is in the people, and it is in the persistence of making a lot of really small, really good decisions day after day after day. And it's not rocket science. And the blueprint, the blueprint's not a laundry list of like 30 things.
But I think what people want, I think intuitively we want, is an easier answer than that.
I wish there was one.
You know what I mean? Like,
I was looking for that for a long time.
The silver bullet, or like I finished this book recently, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, with Ben Horowitz.
Yep. Love it.
And he talks about what he's describing as kind of your journey, really low lows.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gone there. Like, if we actually did a breakdown of the market cycle that you've gone through at Traeger, and supply chain and interest rates,
the lowest low of my career,
like
3 years ago,
gnarly stuff to navigate. But he talks about this idea that there are no silver bullets. There's lead bullets, and you kind of have to shoot your way out of the salon or the saloon. It's
you do. So you have to have experiences, and it's funny to think I came out of Harvard Business School and I read thousands of case studies, and I thought I was smarter. I thought I was prepared. And I will say, I graduated 23 years ago now. It is all about experience. It's like not just career, but life.
Yeah.
And I will say also, I don't compartmentalize my career from my life. I spend so much time doing it. I actually need them. Like, I need to take all of the things I learn in my career and apply them to life, because that's where I grow so much. And you need experiences. You need a certain number of reps. There are no magical answers, but when you have a lot of reps, you have pattern recognition. When you've gone through a lot of pain and you have emerged from that, you have confidence. And when you get to stack confidence upon confidence, confidence doesn't happen from winning. It happens from going through hard things.
Yeah.
And finding yourself on the other side. It's amazing.
Yeah, truly. I think about my career and what I do today, and so much of like my confidence or peace comes from having a career that in door-to-door sales that was literally built on failure.
Yeah.
That you have to actually fail 10 times.
It's a gritty.
And emotionally, that's not natural.
Yeah.
Like, to actually figure out how to see failure as a step toward success I think it's a learned skill. I don't think it's a natural skill. I think it's a learned capability that I think all of us shy away from in our natural state.
Of course.
Like you
no
don't
one wants
want
to go
pain
through that stuff. No.
to go towards pain.
No.
And so, I mean, we have to do this again because there's so many places that I want to go, but there's a couple things that I want to kind of tie together or get some opinions on. One of the things that you've talked about that I admire so much is you have some championship habits, some private victories that you do. And I'd like you to like share those because there's some things that you do. Wake up early, climb a mountain on Monday morning, like go on a gnarly trip every year that scares you. That there's just some things that I like really admire that, and I want. What are those things? What are those activities? And what's the why behind them?
So I'm gonna share that, like you just talked about 3 things that are important part of my life. I am a believer in habits. And although I am also a goal setter, what I have realized is habits, when perfected, little things make you really strong. The consistency of little things done well make you strong. And I would say I didn't really learn that until I got through these 2 terrible years at Skullcandy. And I look back, I mean, I was like weeks out of this experience and saying, I wasn't strong. Like I was beaten down. I was out of shape. I wasn't eating well. Spiritually, like I wasn't fed. And none of these things were deliberate. But I also wasn't deliberately taking care of these things. And I think that's what good habits are. And, I told myself, there are a few things that are core to the foundation of who I am, and I will never compromise them again. I will never compromise them again. And I'll tell you what I learned, and then I'll tell you how it got me through the hardest moment in my career, which interestingly, like I said, wasn't that long ago. But what's amazing is when you say, I learned from what I went through. I learned from what I went through 13 years ago. So I finished Skullcandy and I said, I'm unhealthy. I don't feel good. I'm sick. What are the things that I value? And that's when I said, and I'd read about this, but I was a morning person who became a late morning person because I just couldn't get out of bed. Like, it's like in bed at 2, struggled to get up at 7, like blurry eyed driving to the Skullcandy office. And I said, I will always wake up. I will always be an early riser. That was a start. I need to tackle life early before everyone's out of bed. I need to find strength before my life gets chaotic. And I do every single morning.
What's the hour?
I'm up at 5 a.m. and that is my hour. And why is it 5? Why is it 5? Well, because there are things that I'm committed to getting done between 5 and 8 o'clock. And if I get those things done, my day can go completely off the rails, and I'm happy. I'm satisfied at the end. And so it starts. I mean, 5 o'clock in the morning. There's some days where I need the alarm to go off because I'm exhausted. And there are other days where 4:59, it's like, let's freaking go. Like, let's go. What I found is that I'm excited for my morning routine. Like because I know what it does for me. First hour of the day, I wake up. I don't unlock my phone. And I have learned I need time before my mind gets chaotic, before it starts racing. By the way, the racing mind, to me, that's an exciting thing. When I start, my mind starts going on my business.
Getting in the game.
Path of least resistance. Let's go. Like, this is awesome. But I don't want that to start yet because there are things that I can't get my mind. I can't put the genie back in the bottle once that started until I've slept. First hour, it's a tall cup of hot water, and it's every day. And I tend to sit in either the dark or relative dark, and I sip and I think. And I think about, oftentimes it starts with, and it's interesting. I only shared this with Kristen like we've been married almost 20 years now. I shared this with her about 6 months ago. The first thing I think about is, how was my day the day before? Like, what did I not do well? And that is an enlightening thing. I find that when I try and assess my prior day when I go to bed, it's like there's too much going on.
Yeah, you're not fresh
But I
enough.
told Chris, I was like, the first thing I think about was I a good husband yesterday? It's like, I could have done this better. Or I got frustrated with one of my boys because he wouldn't brush his teeth. And it's interesting in a moment where you catch a moment. And Kristen said, I've never once woken up and said, like, was I a good wife? Like, Chris and I are very different. She just wakes up and says, I love you, so I'm going to be a better wife. I am very methodical about some of these thoughts. And then I think about, am I happy? Am I balancing? Am I making the right trade-offs in life? That tends to lead to meditation, tends to lead to prayer and spiritual things. And sometimes it's opening a book of scripture. Sometimes it's listening to something spiritual that inspires me. It could be music. It could be, it could be a talk that someone's given that I enjoy. And I have an hour, and an hour may not sound like a lot of time, but I can cover a lot of ground in an hour. And I finish that hour, and my caffeine supplement is kicked in.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to work out. I'm ready to climb a mountain. I'm ready to lift weights. And I do that every day. That takes me to the second thing. I have found so much peace in grinding up a mountain. It puts my head in a good place. It's peaceful. I love the sound of my spikes on the ice or in the snow, of hearing my breath, of feeling like I am pushing myself so hard. I'm nauseous, but it's making me stronger. That is my happy place. It is my absolute happy place.
In the pain. Yeah, isn't that beautiful? Like,
it's amazing.
I think it's counterintuitive.
It is.
But anybody who goes there often knows it's true. Like,
it makes my head and my soul right.
And it makes you proud.
It makes me proud.
Yeah, like it gives you this, I think about, like,
it's an accomplishment.
All of us have heard this phrase, but the private victories precede public victory.
100%. There's so many more of those private victories.
What you're describing right now is the private victories.
It is the private victory. And actually want to share just a quick thing from that lesson, which is, when I was, it's interesting. I've always loved the physical pain of grinding up a mountain.
Yeah.
And, and yet there has sometimes been pain in my life that was just burdensome. It's like heavy. And I remember that, getting 6 months into 2022. It's like, I felt like I hadn't learned it all in my business career. And I went through the hardest moment ever. And I remember day after day after day. And this is crazy to me to think back on. It's like, it's not like this is when I was a kid. Waking up and Skullcandy Traeger had been very successful, and we were hanging on by a thread. And every day I'd wake up and I would go through a similar train of thought in my mind. Never verbalized it, but I knew what I was thinking. I would look in the mirror and I would groan and I would say, your life is so good. You have an amazing wife. You have 6 amazing children. You don't work to put food on the table anymore, but you're miserable. Like, I was unhappy, and I am not an unhappy person. And so this was really concerning to me. And I remember saying to Kristen, I can't quit, but I'm unhappy. And I remember thinking, my daughter, by the time I turn this business around, my freshman daughter may be off to college. Do I want to live the next 3.5 years unhappy? And I was running up a mountain, like literally one of the days I'm having this thought process. I'm running up a mountain. I'm internalizing that thought. I'm internalizing Brene Brown and David Goggins and everything that I'd listened to and read. And I'm getting towards the top of Grandeur Peak, which is one of my favorite mountains to climb. And I am so close to exhaustion that I can barely keep going. And I had this thought of, it's making you stronger. It's making you stronger. This is good. How strong are you getting? And then I thought, wait a second. Why am I applying this to physical pain, but I'm not able to apply this to emotional and mental pain that I'm going through? And I said, whoa, there's something here. And the next day I'm lifting weights and I'm looking in the mirror and I'm saying, man, this hurts, but I'm getting stronger. And it's interesting. When I'm going through hard things, I get in really good shape because like it sets my mind right.
You grind, yeah.
And I grind. And I was
You think
really,
it's because you can control it?
Yes.
You're like, I can't control this pain, but I can control this
pain. And what I realize, the deeper the pain, the harder I grind, the better I feel.
Is it just confidence? Is it like, I can do hard things and I'm gearing up to go do hard things? Do you think that's what it is?
So in the moment, I actually think it's less intentional. It's the absence, the feeling of this pain is the absence of that pain, but the endorphins are kicking in.
So I listened to a Huberman podcast.
I love Huberman.
He's talking about cold therapy.
Yeah.
And that's been
I've done that for a few hours.
The last couple of years I've got into, but you have the physical benefits that are really great. But what he's describing, there's some parallels to what you're just talking about right here. He talks about the mental and emotional benefits of cold therapy. And the science behind this is that before you get into the cold, your cortisol kicks up, the fear hormone.
Yep.
And you anticipate pain and your fight or flight kicks in and the initial response is, I don't want to have that pain.
Yep.
And what he talks about is if you're training to have deliberate pain or to actually train that mental and emotional muscle, that you should build your cold therapy around max pain. And so it's it's diabolical a little bit, but it's like, what do I like the least about this?
Yes.
And like when I was getting in, I wouldn't put my head under, I'd keep my arms out, I'd stay still.
Yes.
So and once I listened to this, I said, okay, head under, very first thing.
You have to.
Hands under, take my medicine. Before I get out, head under, because I started training myself to do the exact thing I didn't want to do. And I think it's helped me in the physical world. Like
totally.
I think that
you're like very consciously, you're saying, I know that hurts. And I've had the same experience. I don't have great circulation in my hand. And so I used to leave my hands out up to the wrists. And then someone says, no, you got to put them under. And I remember the deep pain, but interestingly, the pain I felt in my wrists, there was no longer cold in my body. And it's like, okay, this is progress that I'm making. And so I have this moment up a mountain. I have this moment lifting weights. And over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks, I really obsessed over this thought. And I will tell you, I went from, this is the worst moment of my life. And again, it's like, Jeremy, have some perspective. Like, have some perspective. But it was important to me. It was important to me to take care of the families that were connected to this business. To, this is messy, and the messier, the better. Like, let's go. Like our stock had gone from $32 to less than $2. And it's like, Wall Street has left us for dead. Let's go. Bring it on. It was messy. And it was interesting how the burden of the mess, the burden of the challenge turned into the intrigue. It was like, it went from a problem to an intriguing challenge. Wow. And it's been an amazing experience since then, professionally. But what I hang on to the most about that is, it still is painful some days, but it's not bad painful. It's like, it's interesting and it's fun, and we're solving hard problems. But what I love about that is that I had looked back on the hard moments of my life, and I'd always said, we all know that's when we grow. But I always said, that sucked. it sucked, and it was horrible, and it was miserable, but I'm glad that I went through it and was strong. The difference is, in this moment, I got to my mindset was, this is really hard, but what a great opportunity to go through this. And part of what was great about it is that I was trying to define every day who I was becoming because I was going through something hard.
Yeah.
And like that is not a lesson that I apply to selling wood pellet grills. It's a life lesson.
Me and you talked about this the other day. And again, you've sent me a couple of video texts that are really meaningful to me. And the reason it's meaningful to me is I know you're busy. I know you have a lot of other things. And so when somebody takes time and they're thoughtful and they're deliberate, I really admire it. But one of those, you were talking about a podcast that I had done on identity.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're describing right here, I've worked on it for like the last 5 or 6 years, and it's changed my life. This idea that I'm not my job and I'm not my body. Like I'm different than these things that I'm going to go get my source of strength from principles, from being kind, from being resilient, from, my faith in God, from some of these things that no one can ever take from you.
Absolutely.
And it sounds kind of airy-fairy, but it's been so impactful for me to say, this is who I am. I'm, and what you're describing right now is it. If you are a CEO of a company that has a $32 stock, you're very vulnerable to have your identity rocked when that's not the case.
Yeah.
But if that's not who you are, like if you're, a dad and a father and an athlete and a son of God and also like a committed CEO to go build an incredible company, no one can take that from you.
Can't take it.
And if it's a $3 stock or a $6 stock or a 12, like you're trusting what you're saying, which is really hard, which is I'm going to focus on what I can control. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to make the right investments. We're going to do the right thing every time, and the outcome will take care of itself. Don't know if it's this year or next year or 5 years from now, but I'll never
there's
profound.
There's real confidence in that mindset, which is I don't control these exogenous factors, but I do control the process. I control who I am. I control how I lead. I control how I behave. Do I control my emotion? Yeah. Like I do. And I've learned that. And identity is it's so important to root your identity in who you really want to be, who you truly want to become in life. And, and actually you'll appreciate this. I have a reminder that goes off my phone every morning, and it says, ask yourself, who am I? And it's every morning. And I try not to, it's really easy, a perpetual reminder to get rid of it. But I really try to stop and for a few minutes say, who am I?
Yeah.
Like, what does that really mean? And I remember you saying, the list starts to grow and there are these aspirational, it's like they're aspirational, like they're qualities. And it's like, it's an end state of life. Like, who do I really want to become? And it's awesome to think about. It goes back to Tony Robbins. It's not happening to me. It's happening for me.
Yeah.
And I get a chance to make something great of it.
If you really believe that, you will find the good
you can't
in
lose.
the storm.
Totally.
In the storm. But where focus goes, energy flows.
Yeah.
And if it's, it's so good. So you said you were going through 3. You gave me 2. Number 1, you were talking about you gave me some lessons.
I'm trying to. Okay, so back to and the other one that you brought up is an annual adventure trip.
Yeah,
that we do.
Yeah,
and this whole thing happened. Happenstance. I knew a couple of guys. They were planning a backpacking trip to Yosemite. I was a backpacker, an outdoorsman growing up, but then life gets busy and it hadn't been part of my life. So I said, I'd love to do it. Let's go. Turns out we get to Yosemite and it is freezing, sleeting, snowing, rainy for 3.5 days of backpacking. At one point, we were so shivering cold that we had to set up our tents and we had to just like get into our sleeping bags because there was nowhere to go. And it was an intense trip. And actually, I remember you and I have a common friend, Logan Deans. And I remember Logan at one moment in time, 4 hours into this, he scratches on the tent and he hands in this thing of hot noodles. They were freeze-dried noodles. You put hot water in. And he had gone up, he had made a fire and he had made noodles.
Oh my gosh, was that
for the two of us in tent? Those hot noodles, like the best. They were salty and they were hot. And we finished this trip. We said, that was a cool experience. That was a cool experience. Let's do it again. And then we did it again. And what was like this, it became, it's a group of 7. We haven't added to it because there's this dynamic of like, we've been through a lot together and we know each other. You share a lot when you're grinding on a trail, when you're, when you're getting eaten alive by scabies in the Amazon and you have nowhere to go, you share a lot. When you're hanging out, when you're, a few months ago, going up a very, very steep face in the Italian Alps, and it is slow step after slow step. You're roped together with someone. You learn a lot about someone, and you learn a lot about yourself. Yeah. And it's interesting. I didn't really internalize why I kept going through this pain. And I would say, like, some of these things, they're like the Amazon trip was almost the end of me, and there was a moment where I'm thinking, what am I doing? I paid for this experience. This is miserable. But I eventually wrote an article in Forbes that talked about these trips and why we do them. And it's really interesting. And you climb you see a mountain that you're going to climb. And I'll say Pico de Orizaba, central Mexico. I remember, driving from Mexico City many hours to get there. You unpack your gear, you're looking at this mountain, you have no idea what's up there. And then you go through a hard experience. You go to base camp, you hike to base camp, you get to a summit, and it's hairy, and you're hanging off a cliff, and you're feeling nervous, and you're feeling scared, and you're feeling physically exhausted at 17, 18, 19,000 feet of elevation. When you get down that mountain and you look back up at that mountain, only you know what happens up there. Only you know what you experience up there. You can tell someone about the experience, but you can't you can't share what you felt and what you learned from it. And I think a mountain's interesting, and I remember in that moment I figured out why I went through that experience. Because I saw the mountain differently. It was big and beautiful and like inspirational and a little bit terrifying as you're going up it. But you get down and you look at it and you say, what I went through was really important to me. And I have learned that you sometimes have to create discomfort to grow. And every one of these trips, I end up loving all of them. And I really love these good men that I go with as I come back, and I feel like we've talked about fatherhood and being a good husband. We've talked about the struggles of career and life. You go through something hard together and you come back changed. And, sometimes my life is too easy. And I always know the adventure trip, like, am I more comfortable, more adept checking into the Four Seasons
100%
than going to the Amazon? No question. But I don't grow at the Four Seasons.
No, I admire it. And, Logan, one of our dear friends, both of us. And I think about these habits and these rituals, and you just think about the profound life effects of a decade and 2 decades and 3 decades that go by and stacking these, and just kind of who you become, or who you
experience,
or who you don't become.
Yes,
by doing those hard things every day. So I'm going to finish with this.
Okay.
This is important one. Talk to me about your faith and how your faith has factored in the journey.
You know what? Boy, faith and family are everything. And I have learned that career is a blessing of a journey I get to have, but it's like my foundation is faith and family. And I grew up a student of faith, but really, really digging deep to find what I believe in. That was one of those hard moments. I mean, that was a hard moment for me. And like in my experience, I was 6 months into a mission in Italy, going around trying to share my faith and realizing that I didn't believe I was authentic in what I was sharing. And I said, I am committed to this experience for 2 years. But if I don't find it in this journey, then I don't know what my life looks like after this, because I'd grown up that way. I remember when I found it, there was a very, very deliberate decision that I've revisited multiple times in my life, which is, this is my journey. Like, I am committed to this journey. I actually remember going through a hard moment spiritually and talking to my dad, and my dad saying, doubt your doubts, not your faith. And what I have learned is I get rewarded for consistency on the journey. And what I have learned is faith by definition is not certain every day. But when I'm in a good moment spiritually, I'm strong. And how do I create that good moment? It's every day. It's like the consistency of small things. And, it's with 6 kids, it's not always easy getting 6 kids out of bed in the morning to go to church. And every single time we're walking down the street to the chapel, every single time I look side to side and I see my family, I just have this feeling of there's no other place I'd want to be. And the only way that I get my family there, well, I'll say 2 ways. I married a woman of tremendous faith, and like we are stronger together. But there are so many moments that if I decided to tap out because a doubt entered in my mind, it would have been so easy. It's so acceptable to do that and to say, wasn't right for me. My commitment was to stay forever. And that commitment gets me through the harder moments, and it gets me to the moment of looking side to side, and seeing my children benefiting from the journey that we're on together. And you know what? If I didn't pull through those moments, I wasn't pulling my family with me. And I'm actually really grateful as I look back. Marriage is a leap of faith. It is. Like, you only know so much. The same way that building a team, like, you learn along the way. And Kristen and I have found a faith journey together, and we strengthen each other, and we're committed together. And we were very different. We saw things very differently when we got married, but boy, have we grown together as people in our aspirations in life and how we think about how we want to raise our children in faith.
Yeah. And I have the benefit at this point of going pretty deep with both of you guys on this subject. And you guys are very different. Both of you guys. And I think that's really beautiful.
It is why it works so well. It truly is.
No, I think there's some magic in the differences. I think that's what life's all about.
It is
to go find that space that's not yours or not hers, but it's someplace better that you can both be, that you can both get behind, that is authentic. You know what I mean? And I just, Anyway, this was so fun for me. I'd looked forward to it for a long time, and it was so much more than I expected. And, want to go do it again. There's some other parts that we didn't have a chance to go dive into, but I think, to summarize, I just tell you, cheering for your wins.
Thank you.
I love when you guys win. And we, the person we didn't have a chance to talk about was Kristen. And I want to get into marriage at some point when we talk, but I admire the way that you guys champion each other. Like I see you guys cheering for each other's
Big
wins.
Yeah.
And I just admire it. I think it more couples
it's the best way to live
would do better if they just went all in on just being each other's biggest cheerleader.
It is a total team sport.
Yeah.
100%. It's my favorite thing about our marriage. She is my biggest supporter and I hers.
And vice versa. You know what I mean? Like she's in the arena herself
every day.
And I see you just hyping her and I'm like, I love that.
Awesome.
And vice versa. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you,
so
Casey.
fun.
This was awesome.